Do this.
Members of the committee, are we ready to start the meeting?
Yes.
Yes, are we ready? Excellent. In that case, we'll begin. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Communities Select Committee. I am Councillor Claire Simmons, the chair of the committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. And now I would like to welcome all of those in Committee Room 1 here in Kensington Town Hall and everybody watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask all members of the committee to please make sure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. And we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell Trench. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Item A1, apologies for absence. Councillor Wade was sent to apologies for this evening, and I believe we have apologies from Councillor Issay for possibly lateness. Item A2, declarations of interest. Does any member have an interest to declare? Thank you. Item A3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of January 2026. The action tracker and the minutes of previous meetings have been circulated. Does the committee agree to sign them as a correct record? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Right, tonight we will be looking at agenda item 5, responding to the resident-led review of the housing repairs service first, followed by agenda item 4, Grenfell housing policies performance update. Now, before you come up, so I just got something I will be saying. This report presents the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea's response to the recommendations made by the resident-led panel who reviewed the housing repairs service. We have the report authors from the resident scrutiny on repairs in attendance tonight, and I would like to invite them, if they wish, to share their experiences or concerns if they wish to do so.
Chair, I think it would be more useful if I share feedback and take your questions after Housing Management has an opportunity to present their response.
Okay. Right, then we'll do it that way. In that case, Associate with Councillor Fay, if you'd like to come back. James.
Chair, just while they're assembling.
Yes.
From the previous minutes, I
Yes.
did want to mention the record. It was a matter of one, just minor matter arising from clarification on a
Yeah.
certain point.
Yes.
Was on the paused sites.
Yes.
I wondered if I could ask for clarity. We did discuss it at a preview. I wondered if
Yes.
it's now is the time to do it. or
That's correct.
later.
That's correct. That was item 10 on page 5, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
I believe that those minutes are accurate as to that, and if you'd like more clarity, that's an action we could take away and request
Okay.
from the relevant officer.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now I will turn to Councillor Bell, and we had Jahed Rahman and some other officers.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, we'll just, James, would you introduce
Yes,
yourself?
my name is James Carroll, Head of Resident Safety and Repairs.
Salt McVeigh, Councillor Housing.
John Head, Director of Housing Management.
Olivia Hutchison, Quality Assurance Manager, Housing Management.
Welcome. So, Chair, before we get into this, because John is going to be leading on this, I would just like to officially thank the residents, Rose and Marcellus in particular, who led on this report. I know it was a huge amount of work. It was incredibly thorough. And I'd like to thank them formally for that. So thank you. And also I'd like to thank them for being chairs of Residents Association. I think this role is not ever overlooked, but I think it's overlooked in terms of how much work it is involved in being a Residents Association chair. I think it happens not just for in housing management, but across the borough. So it was a huge amount of work. And so I'd just like to say thank you to them for doing this, but also in that other role, and also to all members of the TCC who are Residents Association chairs. So it was a huge work, and we really, our service relies on hearing from residents. And when they come to the TCC and when they do deep dives like this and reports, it's really important that we take it all seriously. So over to Charlie.
Thank you, staff, and I would reiterate my thanks to Rose and Vasilis for carrying out this not only a really detailed, evidence-led piece of work, but really insightful piece of work. The service has committed to taking their feedback on board to drive through and forward improvements we need to make. So just by way of background, a resident-led repairs panel was created by the Tenants Consultative Committee in July 2023 to review the housing care service. The panel conducted a full service review and submitted its final report in 2025. An initial response was provided to TTC with a response to the panel's findings in September 2025. I subsequently met with the report authors in February with a view to provide a very comprehensive and detailed report, which you have in front of you, with a view to share our recommendations and findings and get some dialogue around the way forward and if they agree with the implementation plan. Very broadly, we've agreed a large number of recommendations made by the resident panel. So the panel identified several areas within the repair service, from limited digital access, inconsistent call handling, misdiagnosis of repairs, weak communication, ICT constraints. And RBKC has accepted most of the recommendations. Within the report, you will see 6 key areas that we're focusing on to improve. So the first is around access to repairs and ICT. The panel highlighted over reliance on phone calls, inconsistent call handling, and outdated online information. They recommended a robust online portal service with tracking and the ability to upload videos and photos. RBKC have agreed that these works need to progress and develop, and we had already begun the development of a portal last year, although some of that work has subsequently been delayed as a result of the cyber attack. The second area was around triaging and diagnosing appointments. The council raised concerns over misdiagnosis of repairs due to limited technical triage and a lack of case ownership. They recommended stronger monitoring of live and overdue repairs. RBKC improved the professional triage. We've added subsequently diagnostic tools to enable us to diagnose repairs accurately at the point of call. And we've introduced new dashboards and increased oversight subsequent to the review being undertaken. The third work stream was around communication with residents. The panel found communication often too passive, with limited appointment confirmation and updates. They suggested improved communication pathways and resident engagement campaigns. We are enhancing our messaging systems that James is leading on, as well as training teams and embedding campaigns into the 26-27 repairs plan. The next area was around cost control and contractor performance. The panel identified inconsistent cost controls, poor planning, and variable contractor oversight. They recommended mandatory before and after photos being taken, and we now since implemented a system when we do go out to carry out repairs, we do take pictures of the before and after, and again, it's a recommendation taken forward as a result of the work both the solicitors and pros have done. The fifth area was around the coordination of capital programme. The panel noted duplications and missed appointments due to poor cross-team working. RPKC have since implemented monthly joint meetings between our repairs team and our capitals team to share data that align with informing the capital works that we do as a result of the response repairs that get logged. And the final area is around governance and monitoring. The panel requested ongoing oversight and regular feedback to the panel and TCC. And we've committed regular updates throughout 26-27, and we're developing a detailed service plan, which will be shared with our engagement structures.
Thank you. I will now go to committee. If you have questions or comments, please raise your hand. Councillor Rossi.
Yes, it's about the single point of contact. I think in the paper there is a section where you say for a complex repair there will be one person who will be named who will be like in charge of the repair and one point that you can go to. But I think sometimes with the maybe lesser repairs, what people feel is they ring up and they talk to one person, and then they talk to another person, and then they ring up again and it's another person, and they are continually sort of having to fill in. Is it not possible to have a single point of contact for all the repairs? Is that just infeasible?
So there are sort of practicality issues, and I think it's worth mentioning. If we look at the number of calls the repairs contact centre handled, so on average, they deal with around 30,000 repairs each year, 80,000 calls per year into the contact centre. So when you look at the call volumes from a practical perspective, it's not possible for one person to manage that level of calls that we get through the call centre. I think it's also worth pointing out, if we just look at the January performance figures, there was 2,744 jobs that were logged. 91% of the repairs were completed on first visit.
Okay.
Often where you find where the communication may break down are the more complex repairs, where you may have a leak and then subsequent to repairing that leak, it needs plastering to attend and painting to be undertaken. But the majority of our repairs are dealt with on first visit.
Can I just jump in here, because that figure I'm amazed at as well. I think it's incredible. 2,000, reading it correctly, 2,740 repairs in January, and this is also was in the middle of the cyber attack. So I really would just like to congratulate the team on managing to still come up with a kind of a really effective workaround for our residents on this. And as Jo had mentioned earlier about our online portal, this is something we were working to get to for quite a long time now. And we had literally just pressed the go button in October with everything working, only for the cyber attack to happen. So we fully take on board what residents said about this is essential. You can track a parcel quicker than you can track a repair person. And this wasn't anything we were proud of, and this is what we had worked to overcome. So that will be working properly again.
Can I ask a further question? When that portal is up and running, it will have all the information about all of the repairs on it. So if someone phones in, it's a different person who answers the phone, they will be able to go onto the portal and they will get the details in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
Yes, I mean, I've seen it in practice.
Yeah.
And you can go online, you can actually yourself book a slot that suits you. And you can say what your availability, how you prefer to be contacted. Some people want to be SMSs, some people want phone calls, some people want emails. But what do you think?
yeah, and the portal aims to deliver a platform for people to log and track their own repairs individually. In terms of reducing the number of people that you may interact with if you need to call, I think essentially one of the biggest drivers for us is to, again, improve on the first time fix rate so you don't have to, and implement procedures and processes where if there are follow-on works, the onus is not on you and the call volumes are not failure demand. We are proactive and we reach out to you with updates. Something that's been introduced is if I have an engineer on site that's remediated a leak and there's some decoration, for example, a follow-on should be booked whilst on site with resident. If it isn't for any particular reason, if that's not possible, we've got some system improvements now where each individual case owner has got tiles, whereby it would show if a job hasn't been completed, it will sit within a follow-on tile. And every morning between 8 and 8:45, they go through yesterday's work to ensure whether it needs post-inspection, where we review the photos or make an appointment to go and physically post-inspect, or we pick up follow-ons that have been missed, for example, or any performance issues, etc. So there's a bit of a backstop now.
Okay, thank you.
I think
There'll be many more questions. I'm sure.
Thank you, Chair. And point 1.1, is this the panel of repairs, from ex-granting residents or general borrower residents? That's one question. The other one is the questions you mentioned 3.2 and 3.3. 3.2 is positive, but is there a clear key performance indicators, regular monitoring, and transparent reporting, and independent or meaningful resident involvement? My other concern is about the contractor performance. Is there an oversight and accountability? Because many residents, they always complain contractors, they didn't do the job properly, and then this the descriptor comes back, and it is a cost effective to the council.
Thank you, Catherine. So first, to answer your first question, it's borough-wide. So this repair service is borough-wide. And regarding contractors, John?
yes. So just on 2 points. One is around the independence of our performance reporting. I agree it is important to triage the data that we've got held internally and what our systems say against the feedback we get from residents. So each month, when we close down the repairs that we completed, we commission an independent company called Quest that do transactional surveys. So between April to January of this year, there was 1,716 transactional surveys completed by Quest, of which 85.3% of the residents that were surveyed were satisfied with the repair service. So we are triaging the data that we've got on our records on the ones that we completed against the feedback directly from residents, and that comparison is really useful. On the contract performance,
It's just going back to that Quest, and that is a company that's completely independent that I understand is used London-wide,
yes,
other councils as well.
yes.
Yeah, and just to add to that before I come on to the contractors, we also have got a practice in place now. So anything that scores below a 6, we attempt to make contact with the resident to get some feedback to see where we can improve next time. And that feedback is reviewed by me to put into lessons learned, exercises, etc. So hopefully we improve on the previous In terms of contractor performance, it's an area that we need to improve on. This goes back a few years now when the previous framework was procured, but unfortunately because of COVID and the issues with Russia and Ukraine, essentially the contractors that were on the framework came forward and said we can't deliver the service for the framework rates. So what we were left with was skeleton allotment of contractors essentially, and it was slim pickings. So we've been working in the background, and we are working with procurement almost as we speak. I had a meeting yesterday to look at short term, which is an 18-month waiver period, where we fix down favourable rates along with KPIs, penalties, performance management tools, and then looking forward, obviously the longer term plan is to do a full procurement exercise. That will come with, as I said, key performance indicators that are going to favour us. We've got things in place at the moment: no pictures, no payment. We challenged contractors a week and a half ago. We actually had a contractor in, and we're no longer going to issue them any work as a result of some discrepancies with SOR codes, quality of work, etc. So it's important to us. We want the service that residents receive to be top tier, and if you're not going to deliver that for us, you don't deserve the work that we issue. So
I think overall the report is very good here. When I read, especially 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, officers responding to the calls. It's really very interesting and it's very good report. I'm happy with it. Thank you very much. Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to echo Councillor Bay's comments about Chairs of Resident Association and the authors of this report. Rosie Eason actually represents a resident association in my ward, and dare I say, it's probably the block that she represents is the oldest block in. It was built halfway through Queen Victoria's reign, and I know it's had a lot of challenges in its time. And I think personally, Rosie herself has helped residents with so much casework that it has helped, I think, officers through challenging times, and I can't praise Rosie and thank her enough for that. I just want to fresh out a bit more further on the portal. One of the things that we've discussed as a committee is those that feel digitally excluded, and obviously this relies a lot online. I wondered if you can give some reassurance for those people that they're not left behind in this process.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think part of the challenge that the residents provided us was, at the moment, most the only way of reporting repairs was by telephone, and can we introduce more mechanisms and how residents can report, which is why it gave rise to self-service. We'll still continue to provide a telephone service. We're not changing our customer access channel, but we recognise there are some residents who don't want to call us and they'd rather self-service, and we're making that function available as we continue to develop that platform going forward.
That's reassuring, because I know that there are some London councils that are not doing that, so that's reassuring to us. The only other thing I was going to say was, do you have any good news on the horizon when the portal will be up running and the system will function at peak performance?
James, the $1 million
Days, weeks, months?
Well, the entire council is focusing on resolving the impact of the cyber attack, and we are no different to that as well. So it's absolutely everybody's focus.
Sure.
But like I said, I mean, we've had incredible kind of workarounds.
Yeah.
To make sure that repairs are being repaired.
yeah, and I think in that time we're trying to be as accessible as we can be. So immediately after the cyber attack, we lost Netcall, which was our operating system. We reverted to Mitel, which was the previous. Came with some performance hurdles, should we say, but we were able to deliver a service. In terms of the portal, I think Fiona's actually going to be speaking with you on Friday with some suggestions. So I guess the issue is we don't want to go live with a portal that isn't fully inclusive and fully operational. There's no point launching something and losing residents' confidence and faith in the portal because, you know, there's a workaround or something. So we need all of the APIs, which is the sort of system, one system talking to another. We don't want any sort of issues or sort of blockages there, because if there's one repair that doesn't make it through to us, it's an issue. So we want to try and avoid that.
The digital sort of priority for us at the moment in housing is to get the BAU systems up and running. And although they are up and running, some of the servers and the API links are not working as they should. We need to get that fixed first before we can focus on future development. Thank you.
Before I move on, can I just do a follow-up to what Lloyd has asked? I'm curious how the telephone service pairs or integrates with the call service. So if you choose to report by phone, do you get similar sort of service as if you
It's all logged in the same system.
it is logged on the same system? Thank you. Mr. Gardner.
Thank you. You gave some figures earlier.
Yeah.
Can I ask, how does the 2,744 of this year compare to the same period last year?
I can give you the figures. I'll have to come back to my team to confirm what the numbers are. But on average, it's around 3,000 repairs per month. What you would expect is a higher volume between October, November, December, as we go into the winter period, because we get more fallouts or boiler repairs and roof leaks. But on average, the amount of repairs that we do is around 30,000. In some years, it's been 29,000. In other years, it's been 32,000. But the average I've taken is 30,000.
So when I look at 30,000 into 80,000 calls, what do you put that mismatch down to? How much of that is chasing?
So the 80,000 I should have had also includes not just for the repair service, it also includes the telephone numbers for the resident housing management service. So any tenancy related calls and all of the other calls that come in for that 80,000.
Assuming
benefits.
you can split them off.
We
What
can.
would you split off the repairs?
I can split that up and come back to you with the exact figures for repairs.
I'm just quite keen to see what number of repeat calls there are, what we are then expecting. Do you have any expectations on what the portal will do to your figures in terms of benefiting? Presumably the number of repairs will stay around the same, both in terms of reporting, if not go up. And question, what then are you expecting? A massive digital shift?
So I would expect as our planned major works program continues to be developed on the ground, what generally would happen is you should see a reduction in the number of responsive repairs. So going forward, I would probably expect a reduction in the number of repair logs that we get. In terms of migration, obviously self-service is a lot more cost effective, and we've always encouraged that. But we're mindful about making sure a large portion of our residents are not digitally excluded, so we'll continue to maintain that telephone service.
Yeah, well, I was merely wondering whether when you looked at the portal, you're then going, actually, we expect 75% of business essentially to be reported through portal. And
That has been looked at, and I can't remember the figures off the top of when we were developing the portal. That was obviously one of the things we looked at, because
I do have the figures.
there we go.
So as of 2024, 97% was reported, 93% was reported by phone. About 6% was reported by caretakers and other officers. And the rest was other means.
Yeah, but
I think I'm looking.
you want to then see how many.
I don't have the data for.
No,
going forward, so-
and you don't, and it's possibly in their business case. So I was
Yes,
just
it will be in our business case for developing the portal, which will at some point, as Giant said, result in less people having to answer.
So can I also then ask, James, you talk about pre and post photos. What do we do with those, and how many of those do we look at? And
how has that improved? I think most of this committee were at the residents' conference on repairs when residents felt there was a massive disconnect between the Quest positivity on feedbacks and their experience of repairs. So now that you put this pre and post fitters in, before you were only looking at a sample of, you were only sampling a small number of the works that were completed. Has that changed now that we get photographs of every job?
Yeah, so as I said, we've got the allocated time for each supervisor or work stream owner to go and check yesterday's work. So they will be checking for photos. If there are no photos, they'll be phoning the in-house operative and asking why, for example, or if the photos don't match, we insist that photos should be taken in the same perspective, covering the same area, etc. So we challenge quality of photos, both internally, externally. If the work is relating to complex case or is over a certain value, or is an external contracted order, we will physically post inspect on top of the desktop audit that's taken place.
And how have you noticed? Have you actually noticed that things don't necessarily meet, or do you need changes? What has been the response to the photos as opposed to the drastic where you don't pay?
I'd say it's in terms of the contracted works, we can deal with it before it is receipted in a complaint, for example. Similarly, for internally delivered repairs, it's allowed myself, my operations manager, to deal with some performance issues and essentially try and avoid similar instances reoccurring. So yeah, for repeat offenders, for anything like that, we can tackle it and get ahead. And as I said, be proactive in reaching out to residents. And if we're not satisfied, chances are they are not satisfied. So.
Can I ask one more question? The table in table 1, I saw the paper in a draft form, and I have to admit I'm disappointed that it still came back. Thank you very much. Like it did before. Particularly the incomplete aspects, with the sort of timelines would have been helpful, and to have actually understood what work has been done or is being done is in progress, because I can't really get a sense of anything very much from that too.
Yeah, no, we did take your feedback on board, Councillor Doyle. I think the challenge for us at the moment is it's difficult to put any timeline on any work in relation to ICT until we can fully recover our systems, and then have a realistic conversation about what those timelines look like. At the moment, any development work we do, there's a dependency on the corporate IT team, and because they're obviously working on the recovery plan, it's not possible to put a timeline. And what I didn't want to do was put a timetable in front of you that may get delayed. And it felt the right thing to do is, once we're in a position to put a clear time against it, we'll share that with obviously yourself as well as residents.
I had actually, all right. The residents' report had quite a lot of detail around the recommendations, huge long lists of recommendations and some timescales and suggested, action plans. This table is really a summary and quite a high level summary, so I take that on board. We have a huge list of recommendations, and as part of Jarhead's plan for the service, we're doing service planning at the moment, ready for 1st of April. So one of my jobs is to look at that long list and work with each service area, whether it's repairs, resident engagement, housing IT, and pull out the recommendations from the residents and weave those into the service plan. So I take your point. It looks like we're just saying will be enacted through the service plan, but I can assure you that work is taking place right now to build those service plans. It's just that we don't have the dates as yet.
Do you expect to bring that back to the committee or share it outside of the
Yes, so I'm more than happy to come back through to me in 6 months' time to provide scrutiny and update against the commitments we've made today and how we're progressing against that. We would obviously need time to make sure we can action those commitments to provide any meaningful updates.
Or initially do an offline circulation report and then see if it's not comprehensive enough, if you do want to have it in your schedule of works, try and implement it.
Thank you. I think as a committee, we definitely would want to be maintaining some sort of updates on the progress of this. I'm interested that you say you mentioned a large list of recommendations.
I would say if you have an overarching theme like access to repairs, which we've summarised, getting to that improvement, each one would have 4 or 5 actions underneath that would fulfil that objective or that recommendation. So it's more of a detailed action plan against the recommendations.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions of my own, if I may. Looking at page 41. Communication with residents, looking at 5.24 and 5.25. So the panel found no evidence of residents receiving appointment information other than verbal or mailed letter receipt. And then the following paragraph says a text messaging service has been in place for many years. So I suppose I'm wondering, that seems to me to be a mismatch. How are we explaining that?
Yeah, well, Service Connect does enable text messages to be sent, and text message reminders prior to the appointment are sent. That does rely on the phone numbers that we hold in CRM being accurate, and we check those each time we have an interaction with a resident. So for the most part, if they are able and willing to share the correct contact details, then they should receive a text message.
So how do we explain that the panel found no evidence?
Clarify this.
Yes, please.
So, text messages might be sent. James is right. The system does allow to communicate an appointment by text message to the residents. We have anecdotal evidence that some residents do receive the occasional text message. What we haven't seen is an automated process. If the system relies on an officer taking notes to follow up something or communicate the day before, this is additional work. The system should automate notifications, reminders you would receive from your GP or other services. You have an appointment tomorrow. Do you still want to go ahead with it, or do you want to cancel? These are automated messages. And this is what we haven't seen any evidence in the system. Yes, the system can send text messages, but what is the functionality?
Understood. That clarifies that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can James just jump in here? Because obviously
Yes.
the online portal is going to have that
Yes.
functionality, which is absolutely correct, that we actually need to do that. But my understanding is that some of the text messages are already quite automatic.
They are
automated.
already automated, and they should be sent out at a trigger prior to the job. It's worth noting that Service Connect is migrating. It's going to be called Mobilise, and we're pretty close to enrolling Mobilise and using that. Within that, it offers greater functionality, so we can set further reminders, 3 days prior to, 1 day prior to, and with GPS matching whilst we're en route. So, we've just closed down previous job. We are leaving. We should be within half an hour, for example, because that will aid the resident, and it also gives us greater oversight, because ultimately, if you are not there within half an hour, there's a thing called dynamic scheduling. So it's almost smartly mapping out where the engineer goes next. It's a question for us to say, where are you? You should have been there by now. There may have been some traffic, so we can then get ahead, phone the resident, and try and offer some assurance. So, to summarise, the functionality is there and it does work. It's going to be improved.
Thank you. And looking on page 43 at 5.36, one recommendation related to cost controls with approval thresholds for contractor estimates. The council can reassure the panel that this is existing practice embedded into our variation and approval procedures. Again, what I was sort of wondering is why was this not clear and obvious to the panel if it's already a practice embedded?
Perhaps might ask the panel again, but for example, some jobs, depending on the threshold, and actually it might be reassurance to myself and my team. If a job is scoped right in the first place, there should be very little variation on that. There's also some contracts within resident safety and repairs that may have a self-variation approval limit, say maybe £250. There's also some further things that we've introduced now whereby if there are some variations and they are of a substantial amount or over a threshold, it would go through a supervisor, the ops manager, and ultimately to myself or even Fiona Jarhead in some instances if it's really extreme.
Thank you. I mean, I think we as a committee need to just keep our minds focused on the questions that we have under question 3. Do you have it? I will be. Which is oh yes, I'm not summing up yet. I'm finishing my own question.
Oh, sorry,
I thought it was certainly. So we're looking at the questions: are the measures proposed, quality assurance, resident communication, contractor performance, and cost control sufficient to improve service outcomes? And so I would want to put that to you to ask whether you feel, as officers and as the lead member, whether you feel it's sufficient.
As a lead member, I'll go first just to say yes, yes, and yes. I think it still has to be a huge amount of focus and to get it right. And even though we say, you know, over 91% of our repairs were done first time call out, 85% satisfaction rate, there's still people who are not satisfied and you didn't get their repairs done first. And so if you are that person, no matter if your neighbours have got them done, no matter if other people got them done, you've had to take time off work, your repairs still hasn't been done, you know, that is what we started to focus on. So we're aware that the improved automation will definitely help, and that would be a much more kind of, you know, lean, effective machine to actually get the repairs done. But we still need to make sure that we pick up those ones that do go wrong and make sure we actually act on those. John.
Yeah, no, from my perspective, I think we do have a good repair service, but the challenge here is whilst a large proportion of our repairs gets done in-house, a proportion of our work is subcontracted out. So longer term, we want to continue developing, growing our DLO, so we don't have that dependency on the contractors. And once we start developing our DLO, making sure our operatives are multi-skilled, and the more operatives you have multi-skilled, the higher the probability you'll get that repair fixed first time. In terms of some of the data I've been looking at, so, and then I appreciate repairs can be quite a topical issue. Residents do log complaint because on point of call, something's gone wrong, it gets escalated to members. When you look at the volume of repairs that we do here in our case of 30,000, and how many actually then translated into a formal complaint. So year to date, we've had 268 stage 1 complaints. That's less than 1% of the repairs that we do across the borough. So we're not complacent. There's more work we need to be doing around the technology, more developing our in-house capacity. But I'm confident that, you know, we're on the right path, and more so that we're not a defensive service. We've taken the residents' feedback on board, fully accepted their recommendations, not challenged it, because we are transparent in that respect. and we want to be working with the residents to understand where we're getting it wrong, how we can continue improving so further.
Thank you. Thank you. And finally, before I move on to councillors, you mentioned that there's quite a lot of recommendations. And Jahid, you mentioned that you've accepted most of them. I was wondering what sort of proportion we're talking about and what of the recommendations that were not accepted.
So I believe one of the recommendations that was made was at the point when the call is made to have a trained surveyor doing the diagnostic. From a practical perspective, that's not possible given the volume of calls that we answer within the repair service. And at the moment, not only will it be hugely costly to replace all our call centre agents with highly paid, highly skilled surveyors, it's not needed. I think what's needed is improving the triaging facilities, and we've got the right tools to enable that to happen. I actually went to the repairs call centre last week. I shadowed one of our call centre officers, listened into their phone call, and I saw how professionally they answered the call, looked at the triaging facilities that we're using. Often what you find in a contact centre is it's always used as a stepping stone for junior, lower skilled staff to enter the council workforce, and then they branch out to different parts of housing. And that's the very nature of a contact centre and how it works. So the key for us is to make sure when we do get new recruits, are they being trained well? They've got a 6-week training programme before they're let or allowed to answer the phone calls. And that training programme is really comprehensive.
I might just add to that as well. Whilst we, as Jahid just mentioned, we have had challenges in the past in terms of staff retention. We've got a fairly settled team now, and we're also trying to look at opportunities for sort of areas of specialism. So if somebody develops a particular interest in, I don't know, plumbing, we can look at seeing what we can do to support them, try and retain good members of staff within the council. As part of the 6-week process as well, just for oversight, we've got a functionality of offering video calls. So where we can, and we trialled this with DMC, damp and mould, and now leaks, where we've got the ability to do so, we would ask the resident, are you okay to initiate a video call? Having a visual eye on the issue does assist initial triage. And I actually witnessed that a short while ago. There was a faulty door handle. Needed to know whether it was a girder door because we had a suspicion it was. It was. Within 45 minutes we were there and replaced the handle. So it was evidence that the triage was accurate and effective.
How do you expect triage to work when people are solving on the portal?
So there, within the portal, there are a number of sort of diagnostic aids for resident logging that repair. So there are sort of
It is straightforward.
tips,
Yeah, and there's a whole kind of there's a chain that you go down, and then if you reach a point where, as a resident, you're really not sure, then there's options to get in touch in a different way.
Again, I think as part of it, the request if you would like to upload photos or evidence, if we receive it and ultimately a job is scheduled and we see the job description and it doesn't match the photos, we can intervene where necessary. Sometimes it's not always going to be possible because somebody's gone through the process, feels confident and has booked a repair for tomorrow morning. But generally speaking, it should be up and accurate search.
Do you anticipate being able to upload video on the portal?
So we can definitely upload pictures, but the video is more around when we're on the call with a resident.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I think the video, I mean, I've had a British gas boiler.
We'll find out.
The guy around on the video.
We'll have to find out.
Depends on the call.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
that wasn't
Yeah.
cool, but I know with our noise nuisance team, sometimes video would be invaluable, but you can't because it's too big a megabyte.
Yeah.
So you actually have to
We'll
look
find
at
out in those.
Yeah.
Really questions.
Thank you. Now I'd like to, Louise.
I just want to go a little bit off piece if I may, because somebody who's watching online has just sent me a question, which I think is worth mentioning. So this is engagement working. The comment from one of the residents, complaint figures are not necessarily indicative of what is really going on. And she means that there's a measuring stick. She is aware of many complaints that are never made formally, and it's something we pick up at resident meetings. And it's a challenge that we've got. I just want to make the point there that sometimes people just don't feel they want to complain. They just kind of put up with it and then moan to their neighbours and colleagues and residents. That's something we as ward councillors pick up sometimes and can follow up on. But I just thought it was worth mentioning that as somebody who's watching.
And we don't want to be complacent. And when John has said it's like less than 1% go to complaints.
Yeah.
So even if there were quite a few that didn't go to complaints, this figure would still be relatively low. But I completely understand that. And it might just be that it's not worth making a complaint because it wasn't major, but it was still, the person was late.
Certainly personally, when I pass them on to
Yeah.
officers, it's always been a positive response. So that from my end is a good sign.
Yeah, and I think the resident is right, and there's a danger with just looking at one data set to try and get an overview of the service, which is why we've got complaint volume. We're looking at the transactional surveys, we do the annual TSMs, just to give us a holistic view of the resident experience. And more importantly, these deep dives are really useful and as well to inform our wider improvement plans.
Yeah, we're really mindful there are big gaps which we get wrong for residents' repairs, and that's what we're really focused on. This.
Thank you. I mean, I think what Councillor Gardner has said about the mismatch between what we heard at the repairs conference and what we sometimes see in the satisfaction measures. How do we sort of bridge that gap? And I think what Lloyd has mentioned there is an important point, and thank you to the resident. We see it in our casework that maybe people come to our surgery rather than make a complaint. And I think maybe part of the issue is because of the volume that you have, even though you're talking about less than 1%, that still translates to, say, a minimum of
No, exactly. That's what I said earlier. Exactly.
So because of the volume, it's still quite a lot of people. And if you look at the cases, some of the cases that come to me have been, let's say, ongoing for a long time and long standing. So it's how do we match that when we're measuring that as a council, like you say, sort of not to be complacent, but how do we make sure that we're seeing the whole picture? And the missing piece of that puzzle, I think, is things like ward councillors, things like listening to residents when they come forward and speak, say, at ECC or wherever it may be.
Can I
Yes.
add to that? So it's something that someone mentioned earlier is that mismatch. Our call data actually does give us quite a lot of insight, so the call agents can log what the call was about. And if it's a first repair, you hit repair, and then there are drop down options which talk about chasing something. Okay, so that group of chasing calls gives us a percentage also in the call, so it indicates where somebody's had a difficult time ringing back more than once to get something resolved, and equally on email. So we have an email inbox where people, and you can see that trail. So if you've logged a repair and then somebody's chased it, you log that on the repair again. You can actually build a timeline of somebody's experience, even if we haven't got complaints. So there are those, and we actually do carry out quite a lot of analysis and reporting.
And are those included in KPIs?
They are. The breakdown of the calls are not included in KPIs necessarily, but they are shared between the call centre and the repairs team to show them on a monthly basis how call figures have varied. So if we had a particularly high month of people chasing, then we might look at what the causes were. Was there an issue with the planning team who weren't arranging follow-on works and things like that? So there is quite a lot more data that we look at that gives us
it might make sense to be keeping track of chasing calls.
We do. We have that data. Sorry, it's just not.
And that would then inform how you would feel that the service is performing.
Yeah, so there's a data the service would own the lead on, and the performance data that comes to my management team. As you can imagine, I mean, if we started looking at every single data strand across housing management, we'd have a very big performance report, and we wouldn't be able to focus on the key areas that we need to focus on. So I get a rich data set around call handling, how long it's taken to answer the phones, how many repairs were done on the first visit, how many overdue repairs we've got, satisfaction levels, And those discussions that I've had at my management team, there'd be a different set of indicators and a more detailed set of indicators within James' area that James would be expected to share with his management team to improve and manage performance going forward. And that would be far more detailed than what comes to my KPI reporting meetings.
Thank you.
I still go back to that 80,000 versus 30,000 repairs, and there to me is at its worst. And I appreciate you said that includes some other calls, but that's more than.
We'll get back to the figure about that.
I just look at that and I
If you
go,
think
that's the
What
same.
you, to
it's the same
understand, we need
point.
to see what.
But councillor, if you think of the amount of other concerns a tenant could potentially have.
Yes.
I'm
don't want
not
to
surprised
guess
by
it.
that at all.
We don't want to
That's
be
why
guessing on that.
I-
That's
yes,
why
yeah.
we're
Let's
asking for that.
get that figures on
And
that.
just to give some context, councillor, so each year we would issue the rent increase letters and service charge letters that would generate phone calls that James' team would answer. Any correspondence we'd have with residents, it may not just be repairs, could be any part housing management that would generate a call.
ASB, my
Yes.
neighbour, there's rubbish on the estate.
Yes,
There's a lot.
and maybe you don't quote the 80,000 then.
Well, there's.
We'll come back to you on that, as I said.
Yes, thank you.
There's
We'll come back
a
to you.
good point. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask if there are any councillors in the room who would like to make comments. And thank you for your patience.
I just want to start by complimenting the authors of this report. It's better than most council reports.
Yes.
And what really brings it alive is the case studies as well. So there's a real, it's quite forensic in its approach, and then it brings it alive with the case studies, which I thought were fascinating. But anyway, my question is about the digital approach. It doesn't really feel very enthusiastic in our response. It seems a bit tepid. Is this going to be an app on a phone? Because then at least, I'm hoping that kind of 93% of stuff will be reported online and via an app in the future. And I don't get any sense of that from this response. And are we going to ask residents to co-design the forms and the app with us? Because I think, they've got so much invested in making this seamless. And I don't know about everybody else, but often when you fill in forms, you think, who on earth designed this? I can't fit anything that I want to say in here. So it'd be really nice to know that we were going to involve residents in that.
So on a point of principle, of course, any development work that we do where we're asking residents to contact us via any app, just from a user perspective, you want to get their views around how seamless it is to use the service and feed that into the design work. So absolutely, and that is part of the wider corporate approach as well with designing self-service functionality. At the moment,
And will it be on a phone?
We're aiming to get it onto the phone.
Because if we want
absolutely.
93% to use it, I think it has to be on a phone because almost everybody has a mobile phone.
Yes, but an online portal can be accessed via a phone, whether it's via an app, and an app would make
Yeah,
it
but
much
it's very,
easier. Really understand. We're looking at the cost implications of creating a bespoke app for 9,000 households. We're definitely looking at that, but we've got to be mindful of the HI budget.
Thank you. Thank you. In that case, I thank you all for coming.
Oh,
I think she's interested.
Oh, can I just ask a
sorry,
very,
Councillor
very
Hart,
question?
then I'll see you there.
No, that's okay. Thank you. I agree with Councillor Reardon and Councillor North. It is an excellent report, and thanks to Vasily and Rosie for a really, really brilliant job done. One thing that's not clear to me is on the repairs front, nobody takes agency. So a call comes in, they say, okay, it will be fixed. If it doesn't happen, then especially if it's cross-departmental, cross-housing, left doesn't speak to the right. And then, they're being passed around different areas. And I don't think the report says anything about how that's been, nobody seems to take agency of just one problem. So that a resident only has one point of contact to say, okay, it hasn't happened.
Catherine, can I just jump in here because I think we talked a little bit earlier about one point of contact and how ideally, of course, the person who picks up the phone, I wonder if that could be the only point of contact, but they might not be the most relevant person if they're not an expert. As Jahad was saying, there are often potentially more junior people that are answering the phone and they will triage it to the correct people. So I suppose at the point, the term of
point of ownership needs to come, not at the first point, but probably at the second or third point, if that repair can't be resolved.
But if it's cross-departmental, then who will take it?
Well, I think it's complicated repair. What do you mean cross-departmental? You mean
Cross within housing.
Well, cross type, like it might be a plumbing and a joinery and
But it could be housing, replacement housing, repair.
It wouldn't such be departmental, it'd be type of repair.
Yes, within the, yeah.
Yes, not department. We still take ownership within our housing repairs team, 100%. But then if you're talking about the different disciplines.
Because I think this happens all the time.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
The resident always says, oh, well, I started off with so-and-so. Nobody, now back to, nobody knows what's going on.
So I think we need to make obviously a distinction between the service that James's team provide, which is a
Cross-service.
responsive repair service, and often where we need to do major works. And I think sometimes those two get confused. What good asset management service should look like is if we're receiving particular calls around a leaking roof of a particular building, and often we're getting a high number of those repair requests coming through, that data should feed into the asset management program where they've got the capability to replace the roof rather than repair the roof. And that's obviously a sense of review work has been undertaken. We acknowledge that these monthly meetings are now taking place. So often when we see repair indicators, that can inform the plan investment program.
And that has for several years informed that because we're really mindful that if a particular block needs massive repairs, then we absolutely need to do major work on it. But I think you're talking about this specific ownership when a resident phones up, he or she doesn't feel they're being passed from person to person.
Yes, and that's what, as you said, cross services, and so and all the residents should have is just one point of contact. And they give them, what I see what you're saying, Councillor McGray, that of course it's a junior person, but at the same time, it's not the residents, it shouldn't be the residents' responsibility to try and track the whole of the housing department to get to the bottom of what, how to resolve his or her problem.
Yeah, we recognise that experience and we hear that in complaints. But what I would say is that if the call agents are your point of contact, so it's up to them to take the call, put you on hold or commit to calling you back and get the answer from those different departments. So I hear what you're saying, but that point of contact should be that person that you speak to, and they should make a commitment to get back to you with the answer rather than transferring you or asking somebody else to call you back. So that would be our expectation of that call agent. They are now your point of contact for that issue.
If something goes wrong.
If something goes wrong, or if you're left not knowing what the next step is.
And the future plan is,
Yeah,
with the online database, you'll be able to track the time from inception to completion.
yeah, you'll be able to see what the status of the repair is. Is it on follow-on works? Do you need to arrange another appointment because of materials awaiting and things like that? But the same things that we can see on our side about the job should be relayed to the resident within the portal.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so every interaction, every call agent will make notes, give reference numbers, which goes on CRM. So anybody within housing management has got access to the very latest interaction with the resident, not just relating to a repair, but if it's a rental inquiry, a parking inquiry, you name it. If it's not something that we can deal with internally, and we obviously are all located at Pembroke as it stands, if it's a neighbourhoods issue, ASB issue, for example, we'll ask to place you on hold, generally try and contact the relevant member of staff. If we're unable to do so for one reason or another, we will either give a reference in terms of a correspondence that's been sent to that member of staff, and try and commit to a callback, or there's SLAs within each different team's inboxes. So there should be an expectation that you will receive a written response within, say, 48 hours from the ASB team. For example, if you phone again and say a reference didn't happen, that's where things are escalated and tracked. And ultimately, between like myself, head of neighbourhoods, head of estate services, for example, we interact as well and say, there's potentially an issue because somebody isn't monitoring X inbox, for example. So we try and identify patterns and repeat offenders and try and mitigate that where we can.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I'm going to now invite the author of the report to come to the table. So if you would like to take your seats.
They can stay because I will share some of our findings, and I would welcome their thoughts on, if you don't mind.
Okay, so you will be addressing the committee, and we're very
Yes.
pleased that you're here to do that. If the officers wish to respond, then it's over to you as well.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to extend the panel's thanks to all the officers who took the time to talk to us, help our work by sharing data, explaining the processes, and trying to help us understand how the repair service operates. A few points. I've made some notes while the response was presented. One clarification about the surveyor triage. Yes, Jahid is right. In the report, it does say surveyor feedback. The report prior to Jahid being arriving to RBKC was discussed with James, Doug Goldring, and Dan Horton, who's sent left. Ultimately, what we'd like to see is not an RICS chartered surveyor. Yes, that's financially non-viable, but somebody who understands building pathology, could be a plumber, could be a carpenter, could be a general builder, is able to immediately, by hearing the resident describe something, they will isolate 90% of the options, which have nothing to do with, the issue, and they'll ask specific questions, trying to fully understand what's going on. So, for example, if the resident is saying, well, my plaster is falling off the wall, the response by the call center will not be, there might be a black mold issue or condensation. That would never cause it. You'll explore leaks, rising dampness, leaking mains pipes, all these things. This is really important because it's a first line of defense from preventing escalation, unnecessary calls, and trying to get to the bottom of what the issue is. I would like to highlight some points for context. First of all, the housing stock in the borough is quite old. The incidence rate for responsive repairs is going to be a lot higher compared to properties which were completed in the past 10 years. That's to be expected. And a lot of these repairs, they're not as straightforward. 85% of the repairs in the borough have to do with the escape of water or leaks. That's never an easy issue. When you have an aging stock, high-rise buildings, trying to identify where the leak is coming from is never straightforward. So that adds an added layer of complexity to the equation. A lot of the findings, which unfortunately are not highlighted today, don't have to do with housing management. A lot of the issues we identified, we have to take a few steps back and consider how housing management operates. They're, in corporate speak, a subsidiary. We have to go back to the head company and see, well, how have they acted to allow housing management to have the right tools, the right solutions. A lot of the automation we were debating earlier has to do with platforms which are not there. In follow-up interviews after the report came out, we discovered new issues, for example, that say if you have an employee in housing management IT, their remuneration package is much lower than corporate IT. So you have housing management, they hire IT engineers. When a position becomes available in corporate, they jump ship. So as soon as they become familiar with the platforms and the solutions they're working with, they obviously pursue another opportunity which pays better. Another thing we need to consider is a lot of the tools used by housing management, they're deployed and maintained by corporate IT. We're talking about the portal. This has been a recurring theme outside repairs within the TCC for at least 4 years, as far as I recall, that the portal for housing management appears to be an afterthought. If somebody loads the RBKC's website, even before the cyber attack, they can't find housing. They need to click on more, find the tab for housing, then a few more tabs to go there. Simple solutions about consultations or information or forms that need to be available to residents, to reports, for example. They're maintained by corporate IT, who doesn't seem to have the needs of housing management high up on the list of priorities. Simple things, the electronic notice boards. So RBKC has invested considerably to replace the old paper boards on estates with the electronic notice boards since I think 2020. Great tools. The platform is okay. You know, you can upload bespoke content. They're very easy to use. Unfortunately, housing management needs to reach out to corporate IT to communicate somebody who's not a part of housing management to say, well, can we publish this content? Can we publish this announcement? Can we communicate this information? One of our recommendations was, okay, well, we are deploying better tools to report or track repairs. So let's make sure residents are aware. So how do we communicate? Well, low-hanging fruit, electronic notice boards, everyone sees them. The report was presented in June 2025. So far, we've seen no evidence that there's any action to create and deploy a communication strategy, for example. In terms of the portal, the housing portal is a subsection of the main portal. The modules to create a housing portal is essentially an extension offered previously by Capita, currently by MRI, the company that bought off Capita's software business, that connects to the platform that One Housing that's used by housing management. Is an off-the-shelf product. For the most part, is based on obsolete technology, based on some micro technologies which are not their end of life. They're not supported as of 2012, 13 years ago. One of the findings we reported is if somebody wants to hack RBKC, they don't really need to try that much. If the platform is based on Silverlight, which is in the IT community a meme, perhaps we need to look into a more strategic approach about, well, as a council, as a local authority, do we put enough emphasis on creating in-house talent to advise us what technical solutions we need to deploy to ensure we have a robust infrastructure to operate not only as housing management, but as a local authority? And unfortunately, we experienced a cyber attack in November, which has pretty much prevented most departments from being able to offer services, whether it's building control, housing management, planning, so on and so forth. What we try to do in our report is to follow the raw data. For example, we received the raw entries, anonymized for GDPR, for a whole calendar year, 2024, 24,000 issues. And we try to identify patterns. This is not about individual repairs. We try to see, is the incident rate higher in specific estates? And the answer, of course, the data is available, yes. certain estates do have a higher need for responsive repairs. Another interesting metric is 7% in one calendar month. 7% of the properties which reported a responsive repair had to call back more than 15 times. That tells me the repair might be a bit more complex, or these are tenants who moved in the property and the property wasn't prepared properly prior to the tenant moving in, or there is no proper follow-up, feedback, quality control. One of the easy targets we recommended was to create a form to allow residents to provide direct feedback, Amazon style, for every repair. This is for free, and it could be a metric to release payment to the contractors. We note and we updated our report. We added an addendum to highlight that yes, Key West is offering the services to sample the satisfaction rates for repairs. But that's not what we're highlighting. Every repair could afford the resident the opportunity to say, is it completed? Yes, no, satisfactory, photographs, performance of the contractor. And that's for free. This is data provided by the residents who have a vested interest to follow up and say, well, yeah, we're satisfied. Great. Case solved. Or don't pay the contractor.
And is this a recommendation that was not agreed?
I don't know whether it was agreed or not. This is an abeyance. It's
Okay.
detailed out in our report in the matrix. So our report set out some targets, some things we could deliver within a month, some things we could deliver within 6 months, and some things we could deliver within 12 months. To begin with, and again, in the interest of fairness, there was a huge transition within housing management since the report was presented last June. But still, it goes to show you that if we're in March 2026, still debating, some forward visibility of what we can do. Whereas if you're saying, well, we're pretty confident these things can be delivered within a month, to create a form tied to the CRM and allow residents to, go there, provide feedback, automate. There are technologies right now where you don't need to go manually through every report. You can do an aggregate, you can do brief summaries, you can ask, highlight repair cases where the resident is really not satisfied and they have issues with the contractor, flag them to follow up by somebody within the repairs team. I'd like to think that we need to be very result orientated. These are not very complex solutions, and the capital investment to deploy such functionality shouldn't be an issue. I think it's a matter of coordination between the various teams and corporate IT to allow such functionality to be deployed.
Thank you. So it seems to me, in terms of where we go from here, that this continues to be a work in progress. I think we've heard in the discussion a little bit about the table 1, not having concrete timelines on yet, and that this is something that we need to revisit, and I think the committee will want to be updated on it. Thank you, Vasilis, for your input. It's really helpful, and I know that you've sent an email to the committee as well, which we've all received.
Again, just to clarify, so there's no ambiguity, I think the housing management is doing a good job considering, the challenge of offering repairs to a stock of aging properties around the borough, and given the tools available to them. The report is not we try to be as independent as we can and present a balanced view, and We continue to be available as manager to answer questions. We're just trying to give a more high level view of where certain issues exist and what's the bigger picture on how it can affect.
I think the point you made about corporate IT is a pertinent, relevant one.
Right now, I think everything's on the table. I would just like to thank you very much and really note all those additional points that you've drawn out as well. I think really helpful, and IT is absolutely top of mind at the moment, and we will be getting back to you. I think the comments regarding the table is absolutely correct, and we need to put timeframes on them, as Jaya had said. So,
and also some of the quick wins have been identified.
Yes.
And I think this needs to be part of an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
And it may be, I mean, don't know how the committee feel. Maybe we want to make a recommendation about bringing this to corporate IT, this issue, perhaps in conjunction with yourself, Councillor Day.
Yeah. And also, I just also like to thank you for acknowledging the changes in the housing management that's been since this report. And just when we were kind of getting everything going, and then the side where now Jai is really kind of gripping it as well. But James has been very consistent in the team as well, I think. So thank you. It's been incredibly constructive, your report, actually. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
All very good. Yeah.
We are indeed. And I think we're recommending that this be an ongoing piece of work, as described. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
I just want to find my.
So,
Let's just sit.
yes,
Such a stay.
thank you. So we went to item A4. Is rental rehousing policies performance update. This report provides the Housing and Community Select Committee with a high-level summary of rehousing performance under the Grenfell Housing Policy, the Grenfell Settled Homes Policy, the wider Grenfell Rehousing Policy, and the local lettings plan for Lancaster West Estate and Browning House. Council Secretary today will present this report along with Councillor Welcome.
Thank you.
And please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think the report is very, very thorough, and I think there's a lot of information in it. And as you can see, it covers a very sad time, and I think that a lot of the policies have changed over the years according to how we needed to respond to the terrible tragedy. And I think I'm happy to go just straight into questions. I think I'll do the best.
Thank you very much.
I've got a question. Can I go straight to Appendix C, which Samia has presented us with? And my question is really, I mean, she's talking about people who were not captured by the four schemes on Grenfell housing. And it seems to me that these people who are perhaps near the tower in the finger blocks who were put there by other councils. Do you know what I'm trying to get at is, according to Samir, there are some people who've been left behind and left out. What I'm trying to work out is basically how many alternative people are there. Is it a large number, or they're just?
Well, her report doesn't mention the names, the numbers.
No.
But Alton's been incredibly involved in this. So
Yeah.
So we for anyone, any policy, no policy will ever capture everything, which is why we have provisions within the main scheme. All these policies, there's a main housing allocation scheme, and these policies are, if you like, offshoots of that scheme. That's the framework. Where there have been cases, including cases that were in there, placed there by other buyers, we have considered them on a case by case basis.
Yeah.
And the numbers that I'm aware of are very, very small, single figure numbers. And we've looked at them individually. In some cases where the local authority, for instance, like in a neighbouring boroughs, they may have placed them there, where they have a housing duty and they've got an option to assist. But then we have worked with those local authorities to support and explain to them the impact of our experience of what we've heard from residents about the impact of the tragedy and assist in the rehousing process. And where there's been exceptional circumstances, we also looked at them to see how how discretion could be applied.
So it's discretion and case by case basis.
Yeah, and that's what I thought. I just wanted you to clarify that I thought that the numbers were very small and that you were looking at them and that they don't have a separate scheme for them, but they are being looked at because there's so few of them. Okay. So shall I go on to our other questions? So I would just say, where is it? The graphs. We've made a general request that the graphs, the axes are actually labelled. I mean, at the bottom, we know that's the years, but, you know, it just...
Noted.
It's just kind of just for tidiness sake that if the axes always need to be labelled. And then I have one further question about the wider Grenfell housing policy. I noticed that most of the people were rehoused in between 2018 and 2020, and then that it was a much slower process. So basically, that is when most people got to be rehoused, and then it was a slower, for whatever reason, more difficult cases or people splitting it. It kind of slowed down the rate of providing people with.
So in terms of the numbers, it's about 3/4 of the approaches, the initial impact, and because the wider Grenfell policy is designed to assist people from the estate that wanted to move out of the estate and be away from the area. And parallel to that, we also had the local lettings plan, and that enabled the residents who wanted, with all the investment in the estate, the residents who wanted to remain within the estate to stay there. Now, the needs and the people's choices, if you like, they evolve with the passing of the years. So, all the Grenfell policies, they were not designed as policies to be punitive, in the sense that if you don't take an offer, we're going to remove you from your policies. Very much a choice based for the residents, but equally we'll continue to work with all the remaining residents, and on a yearly basis we do look at the remaining cases to see in some cases that there'll be cases will be rehoused through alternative or opted now to remain in the estate. It's very much an individual choice that residents are and should be entitled to make.
And just a little bit more detail on that, because you mentioned these charts on page 24, and obviously when I saw them, I was like, well, what are the actual numbers? And so there are 42 households registered with the wider Grenfell housing policy, which still remain on our systems and our register, which we're really focusing on. But I think what Alton was saying earlier, the vast majority of the applications are in the early years.
Okay.
So it's not as if suddenly there's been a mass amount of new applications.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you. Now.
Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Chair. Page 20, 12.13, is mentioned that private tenants are not qualified for housing. Why they are not because it's 24.13.
4.13.
Yeah.
1.4 or 1.3?
1.4.
1.4.
Yeah. So since they experience the same problem of trauma and everything, you said they are not qualified, even though not covered. And also lectures. But in page 26 is qualified residents including so lectures. So why here they are not covered? And page 26 qualified residents including lectures. So it is contradiction. And why private residents they were not covered? Because of they have same experience, same problems, as Bramfield.
Okay, I think Anton can.
Yeah. So page 26, the first policy refers to the Grenfell rehousing policy, which applies to the survivors and bereaved from the Grenfell Parallel Grenfell Walk. And that because the survivors and bereaved whose main residence was in the tower or the walk immediately before the tragedy, the commitment was to assist everyone because they lost their home. The other section that 414 that you mentioned applies to the wider Grenfell policy where residents didn't lose their home, and the intention behind that policy was to ensure that residents affected by the tragedy they retain their housing status that they had before. So if they were secure tenants, we would, through the policy, seek to assist them to move into another secure tenancy. Or if they were councils from recommendation, again, we'd look to keep them on that same pathway. And for residents who were from the wider estates who were in private rented accommodation, there were other options, including assisting them to move into alternative temporary accommodation that was available in those cases that were displaced because of the tragedy. So there's a distinction between the resident. There's a specific policy for survivors and bereaved who lost their home.
Let's pick up. Sophie, you talked about the. So if we go to page 19. I think this is the 4.7. This is the 15.
Yes, referring to the graph, yes.
Over 60% of those, I presume, they applied before April 2019. I appreciate you can't go into specific details so we can identify people, but that's a significant number in terms of 60% having been registered before 2019. We're now in 2026. What's the challenge and what can we do to actually help those houses, all those households?
So as I mentioned earlier, we do review every year to look at how the other options as well. So there's some other options where some residents who may have chosen to be on the register to move away from the estate. And in some cases, they move through the refurbishment program in the estate. Or in some cases, it's a case of the properties that become available meeting the needs and the choices of the residents who are entitled to make a choice whether they want to actively apply for properties or not. So it's a combination between residents sort of exercising their rights and choices as well as the supply of accommodation that's obvious choices.
So if we're saying 42, so if I use the figures you've got here, it's 40 households, of which 60%, so that's, say for argument's sake, that's 25. Okay, thank you. Very specific. But they've been registered since 2019.
Yeah.
Are you saying they have been rehoused, but they're seeking
No,
changes?
They are on the policy to waiting to be rehoused.
And is that because of size of dwelling?
It's a combination. So the size is a breakdown of 1, 2, 3, and 4 bed properties, and then it's just a case of properties becoming available that meet their needs that they bid for, and also we have different categories of residents with different degrees of need and priority on the register. So it's a pool of limited number of properties that becomes available. And when it does, It's a case of the highest priority household being offered the property. And so in a way, the numbers, 132 from memory, who have been rehoused since the fire, but there is the 42 remaining on the register.
So has that number gone down from last year, or has it been static, or have we been moving in the right direction?
Yes, so yes, the numbers go down. I haven't got sort of that figure in my head what it was this time last year, but we reviewed sort of the cohort last year, and I know because I was involved with it, that it was the numbers reduced as a result of it.
And this makes, I mean, there's quite a few, without getting into too much detail, that require a 3-bedroom home, the way to review their home. So we have another part of their housing needs, which are encouraging other residents who are maybe in a 3-bedroom home that they don't need anymore to downsize, and so that's freeing them up. So every part of the council is kind of, every part of the housing department is kind of working on different aspects of this. Yeah.
Can I ask on that point around priority?
Yes.
Because obviously there are residents across the borough
Yeah.
who are overcrowded and in need of 3 or more bedroom homes.
Yeah.
So that incentive that you mentioned there, Sol,
Mhm.
doesn't only apply when it frees up properties.
Yeah,
It doesn't
yeah.
only apply to this policy,
Exactly.
but they then become available to a demand across the borough.
Yes, so we have a housing duty to a number of different households with different priority groups, including people here to Scott Farm, for instance. But we have got a banding system as part of our allocation scheme, and we have got band 1, band 2. So this
This feeds into the allocation.
feeds into allocations.
And so your question about the going specifically to the local lettings aspect about, because I asked exactly the same question, is it stopping us from housing more people in the housing register? And I think initially the uptake was very large, and now it's much less. But as you say, people in the housing register are still waiting for a home. And if you're on the LLP, then you could potentially be someone else in the housing register might not get the option to have that home.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? No. Well, I have. Yes, please do. Yes.
I know that we are allowing for the top level there. I can't remember which one it is, but for the people who are most badly affected, either in the town or in the
rehousing funds.
the rehousing in the finger flocks. We are allowing them, if they made a choice early on and they're not happy again now, we are allowing them to have one more move. Is that correct?
So the one more move applies to former residents of Grenfell Tower and Grenfell Walk, because a lot of the bereaved survivors who lost their home in the fire, they had to make decisions in the immediate aftermath of the fire. So the Grenfell Settled Homes policy is a new policy, well, a couple of years old now, where it is about enabling people to move one more time with all the protections as were applied.
Which I think is really good. I think that's really good policy to have. And the other thing is, I know that households were splitting, but that has happened because of it. And I also am questioning if there were children in the household who have now reached maturity or are adult children now. Do we have, if say in their 20s they finish studying, do we have the duty to them? Is that the same? If they want to live away from their parents, do we then have to find
under the Grenfell rehousing policy, there isn't an automatic. So anyone as a household who moved under the original rehousing policy, who was a resident of the Tower or Grenfell Walk, they have the right to move one further time. The Settled Homes policy. Whereas where there are new households, such as you've referred, there is no automatic right for that to happen. We have to look at the individual circumstances to see the impact, and there is criteria set out on that in terms of what we look at in terms.
Because it just strikes me, it's been coming up for 9 years now. So some people who had teenage children, those children will not necessarily wanting to be staying with their parents now. So I just wondered if we had
that's one thing. Not to stay with your parents is not a
that's not good enough. Okay.
It's not the reason why we would move someone. I think the most important provision around the settled homes policy is for us as a council to honor our commitment to support survivors and bereaved to settle and continue with their recovery. So if the housing composition of the family is impacting on the recovery of the family, then we would need to look at how that impacts on the makeup, how it impacts on the recovery, and whether housing is something that could potentially address that, or whether it's other things such as health and well-being, etc., or other elements. But it's not alone. I want my place. It's not alone.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. Well, I have one comment, one observation, which I think needs to be made. When we look at the wider growth of the housing policy, and we look at the eligibility, which is on page 37. There is nothing here, no provision. There's never been, if I understand correctly, any provision for anybody who was not in those what were then called category B locations. And I'm just wanting that to land and wanting that to be remembered. That, of course, as Councillor Issa has said, trauma doesn't ask who your landlord is. It doesn't ask where your property is necessarily. It doesn't ask what tenure you have, and it doesn't ask if you're within an arbitrarily defined circle. So there are obviously estates very close and homes very close, which were not included in any of this. And none of those residents received any housing support in terms of the trauma and the impacts of the trauma on living in that location, which was a disaster zone for 1 year. I can tell you because I lived there. And I just want that to be noted and acknowledged. Within that, we have a set of policies, which we've been discussing. I think there are a couple of points. One of them is the review of the local lettings plan, which the report explains the sort of timelines on that.
Yeah.
And I would like for this committee to be updated and kept informed about that, and also the relevant ward councillors as well.
Yes.
And then the other point which Councillor Rossi has mentioned, I'd like to come back to, if I may, of course, which is about these legacy cases.
Yeah.
So if I understood you correctly, I think you said it's single figures, which means less than 10. And I think you said there's been yearly reviews.
So we reviewed it last year, and then we reviewed it periodically. Yes.
Okay. Because I'm concerned, as one of the relevant ward councillors, the cases I have brought have been met with kind of a bit of a closed door, and it's sort of tough. And I know that one of the cases has now been resolved, and I'm very pleased to hear that. But when a ward councillor brings it to housing needs, and we get told there's no solution here, and it's just tough luck, I don't see that matches with using our discussion on a case-by-case basis at that time. And I'm concerned that there are more cases than you may be aware of, because they will not be counted now as dreadful because they're out in Richmond or whatever they may be. I've got there are a couple of case studies in the Appendix C. I've got a couple more representations here that have been sent to me. I wrote a complaint, and they basically said, because I wasn't on the main tenancy during the fire, I wasn't able to get housings, even though I have so much evidence, etc., etc. That's one. Unfortunately, they haven't reached out to us or even replied to emails I've sent. I don't want to give identifying details, but we have people who were in one of the walkways, more than one person, moved into temporary accommodation, arranged through RBKC, first in Roehampton, very far from our community support network, later moved again. Somebody else here, I've been moved 6 times in total and have been bidding on home connections. And I don't see that they are getting the support that I would expect them to, given that they are within that catchment of that wider Grenfell. And we are talking about case by case basis and using discretion. And we are acknowledging the impacts of the fire on people's jobs, on people's relationships, which maps onto their household. So in the case, say, of relationship breakdown, or children wanting adult children to be with or not be with parents. People's circumstances are very individual, and I'm glad that we recognise that we are looking case by case.
They are.
But I wonder whether, now is a good time to be looking at, historically, from 2017 to now, who from that catchment area was housed where and where are they now? Because maybe it is only 9 cases, but I would like to see all of those cases be resolved. And I think the paper at Appendix C is extremely thorough and gives very strong rationale and justification to assist the council in coming to the right decision there.
Can I come in? So, with reference to the cases that you've raised, and these cases that we worked together on and resolved where discretion was applied and resolved satisfactorily. Other cases has been sort of shared with me from the chair of the Bramley House Residents Associations, and equally we have kind of worked together to find a resolution. We have carried out a review, not sort of prior to coming to the last scrutiny committee 2 years ago, where we looked at the approaches from the wider finger blocks, wider Grenfell area, and cases that were identified there included the cases that we have worked together on to that resolution. So that any discretion that was applied, it was fair and balanced, and it also applied to other cases in similar circumstances. And that's what we have done. If the cases that you referenced there, I don't know about their circumstances, but I would encourage you to share them with me, and I'd be happy to make sure that we review them and to see whether, on a case-by-case basis, whether there is scope for us to apply discretion or not. Because I can't say without.
No, I'm not. I haven't said anything there that will identify a case. I just sorry. Yeah. But that is at least 4. So I think, and so what would be helpful? I'm grateful to you there for your response. But if ward councillors say or RA would bring cases to you that are identified, because you can't track them now as a council because they're not.
I think that would be the best. I think us as the blanket tracking of people who moved out, I don't think would be particularly helpful or useful, because some people might think that might be fine. But I think specifically if ward councillors, yourself obviously, and Chair Bramley,
because what I
have specific cases, Alton has already said please raise them specifically with Alton.
Yeah.
And he will look at them on a case by case basis.
But what I don't want to see is I raise cases and I bring them to the council, and maybe I bring the resident to a meeting, and the resident has to explain the impact on them and their distress, and only to be told sorry, no can do, which is what happened. But I don't want that to be happening again.
Well, Claire, I mean, Councillor Chair, let's make sure that you have a discussion with Alton about the specific cases before we put any resident through any of that type of situation, because we absolutely do not want to do that. We do not want to re-traumatise people. But we've also, I suppose, then if you and Alton can have conversation that can actually then allow the parameters and the realistic parameters and the discretion to be discussed. And then we can get to a fair.
So cases can be referred now to Altin.
So if there's any cases that were displaced because of Grenfell,
Yes.
where we've accepted the housing duty,
Yes.
we can, yeah, please do liaise with me, because we're talking about a very small number of cases.
So we think we are at this point. We may find it's more than we thought.
As I said earlier, we have looked at all the cases that approached where their main address was there. But if there are cases that for whatever reason,
In cases that we've accepted a housing duty to, as you said. So, yes.
because we have acknowledged the duty, we have acknowledged the impact, and it's so yeah. So really pleased for us to continue the conversation and find solutions where they are possible, as we have done previously.
Excellent. So I think there are some recommendations on page 33, which are for the committee to consider.
Chair, can I just ask, is it usual for a scrutiny committee to accept recommendations from an outside body rather than?
We haven't accepted them.
Right.
We haven't accepted them.
Okay.
I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you what it is though, Councillor McVeigh. As a scrutiny committee, we are very keen and welcoming to have public participation and input from residents.
And I think
as
that's
we,
report.
as we saw on the previous agenda item, this is quite a thorough report.
Yeah.
And I think that these recommendations do bear looking at and do bear considering, which is why I want to draw the committee's attention to them. So, recommendation to request a review of all legacy cases. I think we kind of a little bit discussed and covered that. That ward councillors and residents will be bringing cases to you.
We're not going back through them.
I think maybe not the 90 days though.
Not the 90 days.
I think you need to have more flexibility.
Yeah.
So then a follow-up report to the committee, I mean, that would be a briefing. I'd be happy with that if we would.
I'm not quite sure what the follow-up report would entail.
So actions taken and outcomes. I'd like to know that there are no more legacy cases and that all legacy cases brought to your attention have been addressed.
Is that something?
I don't think that
should.
Is that committee or?
In terms of, I mean, if we're talking about.
I think
Individual
individual cases.
In
Okay.
that case, perhaps just a report from your councillors would be sufficient. We have here, recommend the council apply a tenure neutral interpretation of lived in the building at the time of the tragedy, which I think is what other committee members have alluded to.
I wouldn't go with that one either.
You wouldn't?
No, because I think what Alton has said is the people who, for whatever reason, have not been looked after, to put it, in general terms, that you will look at them on a case-by-case basis and you will see what you can do to help. And I think, the thing about endorse the use of, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's
It's pertinent to the discussion question. Yes,
I
please
think
do.
if I'm
Please do.
correct, I think recommendation 4 would be creation of policy, which.
Okay. Yeah,
we
do
can't
a
do.
discussion.
Yeah.
And I just think, I think we go with recommendation 2 and drop the 90 days. And I think that covers it. I don't think we need, and also I do take Councillor McVeigh's point that yes, we can consider what people put in front of us, but we are not directed by
Absolutely.
outside people.
Absolutely.
So I would just, my feeling is to go with recommendation 2 and just drop the 90 days. And I think that's, if other people agree, I think that would be okay.
But not to complete a review. We are not doing a review. We will act on cases brought to us by ward councils. We are not.
I think that's just bad. Yeah, badly phrased. We can.
I think that is a proportionate and suitable compromise. So I think that's what we will do. So you will review cases brought to you.
Yes, so the case is, So I think following the pattern that we have successfully reviewed and worked together on, at the end of the day, what's most important is to get the best outcome that we lawfully can provide for our residents. That's the most driving factor. But within that, we have to operate within the framework.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Would anybody, do we have any questions from councillors? And you know we do like. Thank you very much.
Yes, that specific recommendation, or is that actually a?
It depends how we formulate it, because I'm hearing from Martin that this is an open door. This is
Yes.
kind of agreed.
It always
So-
has been.
It hasn't always felt like that, but I'm pleased that it now is. So I think this is maybe sort of more a point of acknowledgement, and it's an action point for both.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. And then there was also to update us on the LLP review.
Yes.
When it comes. Excellent. Thank you. So in that case, I think we have completed this agenda item. Thank you very much indeed. And we will move to agenda item 6. Which is the consultation working group report. Now, this report provides the outcome of the consultation working group on improving consultation and engagement within the council. I'm going to invite Councillor Gardner, the chair of the working group, to speak to the report should she wish to do so.
Thank you. Just a couple of items, Chair. I think. Thank you to all the members, yourself included, and to the sport officers, Bella in particular, and Henry, as well as those officers who contributed their time both in advance on the day. We very much appreciate because very much teamwork, so thank you. And to Jackie. In terms of, this was, I think, the first scrutiny in a day session that the council has done. And actually, I thought it was a very good way of involving councillors and officers. And I think I would recommend it going forward as something that we should look at. And I think particularly if you've got younger councillors coming on or people who are doing full-time work, that actually it's something that you could take a day off and feel that you had really made a difference by virtue of this style, rather than deep dive working groups where you have to provide ongoing commitment. So thoroughly recommend it. In terms of the actual working group outcomes, which are set out in this report, I think it was some very positive works in terms of recommendations to leadership. And I think the fundamental issue is actually how we can improve engagement. And I think throughout this, we've got some positive recommendations, both to leadership globally and then specifically in different areas. Some of it's already there, some of it's actually just tinkering around the edges. And I'm happy to talk about the one challenge we discussed yesterday at our pre-meet, which is on page 57, on 5.10. This is about the topic of digital exclusion. And actually, sorry, my voice is getting right. But essentially, I probably haven't done justice in that paragraph to actually the amount of discussion that was held around digital exclusion. And so I was looking at probably a sentence in here along the lines of the working group heard how officers sought to engage with residents in different ways, e.g. meetings, GP surgery boards, as they recognised how important it is not to rely solely on online communication. Some members of the public are not digitally enabled. And then we would then, that would precede the sentence that says working group felt the topic of digital exclusion should escape the working group warrants its own reviews. So I will provide the working, if everybody's happy with that, to the officers. But that was my one additional change. And one other one, sorry, gone on too long already. We worked out when we were looking through it, there is actually a duplication of 2 recommendations. One is recommendation so page 55, recommendation 2F for Freddie. 4. There is, it's also repeated in a different guise on page 60 under recommendation C, so recommendation 5C. So I suggest for ease we just delete F to page 55, F so that it just appears in one place. Otherwise, nothing more to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Garner, and I would like to say, as the chair of this committee, thank you very much to you for chairing this working group. I think it's proof that this innovation in method is useful, valuable, and I think we have collectively, with the working group, produced some hopefully very useful and valuable recommendations. So thank you very much to you for that. And I think as a committee we all agreed with those 2 changes to the draft report that we have here. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I just want to make one remark, if I may, which unfortunately was beyond the scope of the work. I mean, I think scoping the work was itself a difficult task because it's a huge area. But I think one thing I would like to see from this council is to be able to provide some meaningful assurance to residents going forward about authenticity of consultation, which was another level of consultation which was not within the scope of this piece of work. But I know it is a piece that concerns residents and has done for a long time, including from Grenfell, and was referred to in the inquiry, and residents continue to raise it in the Grenfell inquiry report work and to councillors locally as well. So I just wanted to sort of put a marker there for that, but that's perhaps something that this committee could look at going forward in future years. I think we have included everything. Would any other member of the committee like to make a comment on this report and the recommendations?
Can I just say that looking at page 61, the voids and lettings policy, there was a consultation and it had no responses.
Correct.
And then there's one response, 2, 2, 3.
Yep.
I think the elephant in the room, I mean, I think it's an excellent report, firstly, to say that, and a piece of work. But the elephant in the room is, should we be doing so many of these consultations if we're going to get that kind of response?
So that was, sorry, that was addressed to some extent by the officers from housing, that there were a lot of consultations and they were looking at condensing them into fewer pieces. And also, I think the report also addresses where you have a low response rate, in this case 0. But otherwise, you know, other cases where it's a small response rate, to be asking, why is that? Is that because residents didn't feel that that issue pertained to them particularly? Or is it, and there's a recommendation there about having a clear call to action and letting people know how it affects them? Or perhaps they looked at it and they felt happy enough with what was being proposed and didn't feel a need to respond, or maybe the consultation was too complex for them. So
the lettings policy, yes, and the length of time of voids and all of that, that is quite, I wouldn't say it's red hot, but it is something which is of interest to people who are on the housing list, etc. So what went wrong that they got no responses?
So perhaps in that case, it was a case of consultation fatigue. There were a lot of policies that came out. And you can see here, here's a list of a few of them. There are a lot of policies that came out for consultation at the same time. So that's why there's, I think, recommendation here about looking at the timeline and the pipeline and making sure there's some coordination. Housing in particular, housing management in particular, are looking at condensing into fewer individual pieces of consultation. And also, there is some consultation where they have to consult statutory reasons, but there's actually very little sort of input that residents can do to change policy because it has to be meeting statutory guidelines. So there are all these other factors which I think we did look into in the spotlight session. We did hear from. Have I missed anything there, Joanna?
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why we called it in front of us.
Yes.
Because they were
So
the
many.
top, they were the bottom five. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't even a question of there being anything else in between. It was, they were the bottom five.
Okay.
What we was probably surprised about was that actually the department had already recognised this and was already working on it to basically say this isn't good enough. So they have changed. I think on page 57, we did talk about this one actually, for 5.8, where actually I was going to put in a caveat to say that it's not necessarily a good thing either. So it can be, and so I wanted to take away and just alter that wording as well. But it's not, I don't think any of us would be encouraged, but they did also talk about how in some cases they look at a smaller subset where they'll get a better value response.
Yeah.
I think they have responded, and that's the reason why we asked for that slide to be in here, because essentially it's what are they doing to respond to it. The proof will then be in the pudding, and that is why we suggested actually in the consultation that maybe for housing management they should actually look at testing. Why, if you clicked on this page, why haven't you filled in the consultation? And that's what we thought would be worth a trial to see whether it's because, frankly, it's too boring. I don't have the time. It's too complicated. Or actually, do you know what? When I've looked at it, I don't have any comments. So we've suggested a trial to try and also dig underneath the rationale. But yeah, it was. They were marked by the fact that they just were so poor. They were very policy orientated documents. So it was dry. So
Yes, it's at 5.2.
I think they have all been said, but the reasons behind the low response rate that the officers spoke to us about in the scrutiny day session, they're in 5.2 and
Yeah,
5.8 as well. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think I do agree with you, Joanna, in terms of what we say about low response rate at 5.8. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also not necessarily a good thing. And the sort of the art and the science, if you like, is in making sure that that gets interpreted as well as possible. So I think we would all be in agreement to a little change to 5.8 there. Thank you very much. Would any councillors in the room have any questions or comments on this paper for us? No?
very interesting. But no comment.
Very interesting. Thank you, Mary. So in that case, we shall move to the next agenda item, which is the final agenda item of this meeting, which is the Select Committee work programme.
Just a reminder that the pre-meet doesn't say in this report, but I am asking for any suggestions from yourselves for items, topics for the new committee in the municipal year. Anybody have any suggestions?
Digital exclusion, not consultations. I also had VCSA voluntary sector in terms of preparation for the reletting of the contracts and potentially pre-engagement as opposed to post-event. And a question generally about whether there should be, because we found when we were trying to set the scope of the consultation working group, there's just so much you can look at in consultation. So query whether there is another aspect, whether it's digital exclusion or some other aspect of consultation. I think we've just focused on one small area. It's very large.
But I think digital exclusion would be a kind of a council-wide, potentially a council-wide thing in terms of us looking at, for instance, what is the council doing to mitigate digital exclusion. and in terms of its own processes, and then also what is it doing to facilitate inclusion in terms of access to broadband or IT or training.
I wonder if we can toss that across. So let's see.
Oh, yes,
Next
great.
for next
I
week.
love it. I love it.
Program.
I had a couple, I think we have agreed at the last meeting to put the older and disabled access provision onto the next potential municipal year. Independent living, started accommodations.
I think that, yeah, I mean, it's something on the sheltered occupants.
I'm trying to see if there's anything else.
And also, I think,
Liz, yes,
given the paper we had last time from communities and what is going to happen to the voluntary sector in terms of the cuts, I think we're going to need to look at that. I think that will have to come, because I didn't like any of the three options and they didn't either, so they were going to come back with
that one. I think is coming back. Yes,
Yes, yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
Because they were looking at a hybrid model, and we felt a hybrid model would be.
Yeah.
And they were going to consult again, I think, with the sector.
So I think that's something
So that
we
one
need
is
to,
potentially going to come back.
we need to keep an eye on it because communities often gets neglected by us in this committee. But I think this is a really important thing to follow.
So I think the voluntary VCS contract is coming back up in 2027, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think you also, as a committee, also need to look at.
Yes, because I'll tell you, because the decisions will be made around about November time. So I'm
Indeed.
told.
Yeah.
So basically, it needs to come back to us. We need to have a.
So does it need to hit, does it land in the very first meeting then?
I don't know that they'll be up to speed then.
No, it might be the second meeting.
Yeah.
Which it already gone out.
But I think what we have to consider is that the charity sector is going to be very badly hit. We need to look at it.
Potentially, yes.
Can I add,
I think we're all agreed on that.
resident trust engagement,
Resident
trust engagement,
trust.
yeah,
Could you say a bit more on that, please?
more involvement with residents who gain their trust. Because one of the things which affect the consultation, that residents, they don't trust the outcome. So it has to be engaged more.
I think this was a piece that came out of the Grenfell Inquiry report response of the council was about rebuilding trust. And I think Councillor Campbell did say that an important aspect of that was around competence. But actually the flip side of that is also around, for want of a better word, integrity, in terms of doing what you say you'll do. And I think those two pieces, it might be more that this is a piece for us, Mary, in terms of the trust aspect of the commitments made. Yes, thank you. Does anyone have anything else that springs to mind? No. If not, we can obviously submit things going forward up to the 27th of March. Yeah, thank you. So I think that brings us to the end of this meeting of the Housing and Community Select Committee. And I know that this is the last meeting of this committee. And it's the last meeting of Housing and Communities in this municipal year. So I would like to thank every member of the committee for your contributions and hard work. Especially I would like to thank the Vice Chair, Councillor Gardner, who has been amazing. And thank you also to our excellent officers here who have supported the committee so well. And that being said, I believe we will close this meeting here tonight and wish everybody a very pleasant evening.
And I would like to
Thank
thank
you,
you, Chair.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you,
you.
Chair,
Yeah, thank you.
for navigating us through some chocolate waters.
Yes.
Thank you.
Nicely put.